Welcome to Whiskey Politics. I'm Dave Sussman, your host and purveyor at whiskeypolitics.net. Find us at America's Voice News, 6 p.m. daily, Roku and Apple TV if you want to download it, or americasvoicenews.com. And you can also find our YouTube channel. Please hit subscribe, Whiskey Politics on YouTube, and the notification bell so you're updated on upcoming interviews. Podcasts, all of your favorite podcast applications as well. Stitcher, GooglePlay, iTunes, where you can give us a 5-star rating. It helps others find us. And the Ricochet Audio Network. So I want to talk a little bit today about toxic masculinity before we bring our guests on. And it's an issue that I think is, it's becoming more ubiquitous in our culture today. It's an idea that's been permeated. Remember the infamous Gillette ad that essentially referred to men as idiots and bullies and bad fathers who are setting their kids to beat each other up and walking around, not being able to control our sexual urges. And listen, most thinking people, they looked at an ad like that and they just, they realized how stupid it was. Many people took offense. As we all have men in our lives that are nothing like this. I myself am a man. We've had fathers, I have sons, brothers, friends. Okay, I don't know guys like this caricature that the brainiacs at Gillette and other folks that are in our popular culture today think of men. But the folks that are behind this awful messaging are now starting to eat their own, as we're now starting to see with Joe Biden. Look, I'm not here to defend Joe Biden's policies or his politics. I could never do that. But and while I think he is certainly creepy, it's certainly the stuff of memes generated on the internet over the past several years, I do not believe he is a molester. But he is now being Me Too'd. And, when the left have become the political equivalent of Hungry Mungry from Shel Silverstein's Where the Sidewalk Ends. You remember that book. We all grew up with it. Hungry Mungry. He was so hungry, he ate all the food. He ate all the food in his house. He ended up eating the tables and the chairs and his parents and then the house and in his street and town and state and the entire country and the globe. I think he ate the universe until he started eating himself. Well, this is what's becoming of the left. And while from a right of center perspective, it's certainly a lot of fun to sit there and watch this happening, the right needs a good counterbalance. If the Democrats are going to be run by the crazy loons within their party who seem to have taken over the second, I call it the second great party in the country, the first being the conservatives, then that's dangerous for all of us. Look, to defend conservatism and free markets and the things we do care about, we need to have a party to compare ideas to. But when the ideas of the left of simply becoming about victims and protecting victims and fake hate crimes and fake collusion and anti-science, and this is the party that promotes climate change science and data, but they also suggest that biological differences between the sexes can be ignored. This is becoming, it's the stuff of jokes. We see it's now becoming ubiquitous. In the past 10 years, the idea of what a man is or a masculinity, what is masculinity? It's now suddenly being questioned. That to promote the alpha male will suddenly marginalize all those guys that are out there that are not alpha males. This became an either-or scenario. Right? You go back to the 1980s movies, okay? It was funny at the time. Jocks were becoming the antagonists. It was the theater geeks or the computer nerds that became the protagonist heroes in many of these movies. And that's now kind of filtered its all the way up here. And look, I was never the jock in high school. I certainly played some sports and, I did a lot of theater myself. It's kind of a good balance. But as a man, I enjoy being a man. I enjoy manliness. I enjoy doing manly things, whether it's outdoor activities or having great conversation and cigars and whiskey with other men and discussing ideas. Well, that is now considered toxic. I grew up watching John Wayne, Bruce Willis, and John Wayne's just been marginalized in the past few weeks. Okay, Bruce Willis movies or men like Chuck Yeager and Evel Knievel. These were our heroes. Charlton Heston or whoever. To this day, I still say Chuck Norris's Delta Force was snubbed at the Oscars. It should have at least received a nomination. Look, it's funny because it's, that whole genre, Clint Eastwood and all these guys. But what they taught us in the roles that they played as action heroes or whatever it was, is that they combined their masculinity with chivalry, and not just how to treat women, but also how to treat other men. Look, in martial arts as a kid, we learned never one to start a fight, ever. You never start a fight. But if you do find yourself in a fight, you need to have the tools to be able to defend yourself so you can end the fight. Where is that lesson today in our culture? We've had decades now of questioning masculinity, and the far left ideas that we all scoffed at have now become mainstream. For example, the Women's March. Well, it's never about women. It's about liberal and radical feminist women and their hatred of conservative men. The gender pay gap. They always refer to the gender pay gap. This is a fact for this crowd, which by all independent measures has been debunked. But don't ever, ever interfere with a narrative. You're not going to get facts get in the way of truth, right? Their truth. But from there, feminism suddenly became a long complaint list of issues against everything you can think of from the left, whether it's the environment or fighting white men and white privilege, to fighting the only Jewish state in the world and the one democracy in the entire Middle East that allows for people to be treated equally, no matter your religion, sexual preference, gender. They are against Israel now. This is the insanity of the radical left. And they've gone from complaining about the patriarchy and calling for equality to wanting to get rid of patriarchy altogether. That gender is a social construct. So how can we determine who can call themselves men and women? If biology and science is racist, unless we're talking about global warming data from liberal institutions, okay? But the idea of gender as a social construct, this has been fermenting in leftist circles for years. And now that the graduates with their gender studies degree are now writing copy in newsrooms and media companies throughout, this is now the next barrier that must be conquered. Like, we need some form of gender neutrality here. We must teach our toddlers about choosing their own sexual preference, their own sexual identity. Little Sally and little Bobby at 2 years old have the right to say whether they want to be a boy or a girl. This is sick. Little babies are supposed to be thinking about when they want to take a nap and go poopy in their diapers, not whether they're a boy or girl. And we've got grown adults in this country and throughout the world now that are putting this on their children. And it's impacting our culture. Young straight men have become socially neutered. This continual browbeating by our teachers in class and by celebrities, quote unquote, in their public service ads. Yeah, bullying is not a good thing. But don't put Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts together in the same room. We need a place for boys and we need a place for girls. What's going to become of men? We can understand how we can get results like this. According to the Washington Post, younger men are now having sex a whole lot less. They either lack the confidence to approach girls, are afraid to be labeled a toxic male and receive the wrath of social media, or they're just not interested in risking being turned down when they can simply go home, click on some porn, and take care of their biological urges alone. Where does this take us as humanity? If kids are no longer interested in sex, listen, there are benefits to that maybe at a younger age. We don't want to see young pregnancies. We don't want to see sexually transmitted diseases. But does that carry with them for the rest of their lives? Sex is an important part of life. It's not just for procreation. Passion and intimacy is critical It can increase the bond between couples unlike anything else. Well until your elderly years. What does this do for relationships? If men have been neutered, socially, culturally neutered, we know younger generations are marrying less. The studies are showing that they're starting their lives later as well. Where does this end? Listen, as a father of 2 sons, I worry about this. My kids are doing great, and they have a lot of friends, but I have to continually, their mother does as well, pull them back to the center when they come home with some crazy ideas. And my oldest is just about to go to college, so it's going to be an eternal struggle. And as parents, all of us as parents, whether you have kids or one day you're going to want to have kids, this is going to be an ongoing effort for us. Hopefully one day we'll look back at all of this and laugh at it, because we will see the insanity of what it's become. But we have to continually fight against our kids being corrupted by these radicals. To discuss all this, I'm delighted to have back to the show today Dr. Warren Farrell, who's the author of The Boy Crisis. It's a fantastic book. We've had him on before. We had him on, I think we were at the AFA event. Look that up. Where we were talking about school shootings. But it's a fantastic book, and we're going to talk a lot more about this with Dr. Warren Farrell after the break. So it's great having you here at Whiskey Politics on America's Voice News. I'm Dave Sussman, and we'll be right back after the break with Dr. Warren Farrell. And welcome back. Dave Sussman back with you at America's Voice News. And as mentioned, it is great to have Dr. Warren Farrell, PhD, the author of The Boy Crisis, a fantastic read if you haven't read it. It's something that I read last year, in fact. And Dr. Warren Farrell, thank you for joining us again. It's great to see you again. How are you?
I'm looking very, very good. I'm looking forward to talking with you.
Likewise. And knowing that you were on the calendar here, I was very excited to be speaking with you, because we met last year at the AFA event, which was in fact focusing on the unfortunate crisis that we see right now with this mass shootings and schools, and obviously all of the problems that has created for us as a society. And you had some very interesting points last year, which were all related to what you've been writing in the book, The Boy Crisis. And by the way, co-author with John Gray, PhD, the Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. So it was a great collaboration and very fascinating read. But let me just first jump in with you right now, because this is something that you talk about in the book. And there are some people that are out there in our culture that will hear about, quote unquote, a boy crisis and may roll their eyes a little bit. Is there really a boy crisis?
There really is a boy crisis. It's in the United States probably more powerfully than in any other country, but it's in all 56 of the largest developed nations in the world. And so, in the developed nations, boys and the society is a little bit okay about survival. And so they allow permission for 2 things. One is for divorce, and the other is for children to be married. Women to have children without being married when they're under the age of 30. And in the United States, 56% of women who have children under the age of 30 have children without being married. And among that group of women, a very large percentage have almost no contact or very minimal contact with their dads. Even those that are living together with a man when they have the child, by the age of 4, by the child's age of 4, the average child does not see his father very much or at all anymore. In the divorce category, the boys that are not having that have minimal father contact are the ones that have major problems. So after researching the boy crisis for 11 years and finding that there were about 10 causes of it, I started to see over and over again that the single biggest common denominator in every country where there was a boy crisis was dad deprivation. So I concluded that that basically the boy crisis resides where fathers do not reside.
So the idea of the father playing a role is a big theme throughout this book. and where you see fathers not playing roles. And I found one of the most incredible things was you actually had this in here, and I pointed it out in the book, so I don't know if we can see it on video right here, but you actually stated that the Hitler Youth and Fatherless Boys, that, and I don't know if anybody can see this on camera here, but there was a picture here of Hitler with the Hitler Youth, and you were basically saying that the youngest and most vulnerable boys were bullied, humiliated, including repeated sexual abuse, that most of the children that were recruited by Hitler were in fact fatherless boys.
Yes.
That's an incredible, I mean, nobody talked about that. We didn't hear much about that.
Very little. You hear almost nothing about that. And so I started, of course, relating this to current situations with ISIS, and saw that about 90% of the ISIS recruits were dad-deprived boys, and the much smaller percentage of ISIS recruits who are girls were also dad-deprived girls. Then I started looking at prisoners, and I talked to some of the Superior Court judges in D.C. and other places. I ran for governor of California and talked to a number of prison administrators when I spoke at prisons, and found that they were saying that when I asked the question, what percentage of your prisoners would you estimate are dad deprived, and they would immediately say, oh, over 90%. They didn't have actual, concrete numbers there because they didn't even ask the question, but it was so present in their everyday administrative work with these men and their internal traumas and the expression of things that they were concerned with, that was really important. When I talked to these prisoners about how important dads were, the prisoners, these guys that were, tattooed and tough, they'd start crying, and they'd say, I had no idea. I just thought I was a loser. I had no idea that I could come back to my child's life and help them not make the mistakes that I made. And so I began to see that our, ISIS recruits, our prisoners. Then I started studying for the research for the boy crisis, the mass shooters, and saw that the mass shooters were more than 90% of them were dad-deprived boys. Whether it's Brenton Tarrant, I think his name is Tarrant, but I really don't want to advertise his name. But when Stony Brook, Parkland, Charleston, University of California, Santa Barbara, Sandy Hook, those were all dad-deprived boys. And so post-Columbine, almost all of our mass shooters have been dad-deprived. And so this was just, this was just the news line hint. I say sometimes that the boy crisis makes the news without making the news, because we're constantly seeing it make the news in the form of mass shootings and so on. But the boy crisis itself is not making the news until, very perceptively, the Fed chair, Jerome Powell, had looked at the future of the economy in the United States, and he said the single biggest crisis besides cyber warfare was what is happening to our boys today. That the boy crisis was basically one of the two biggest crises that the United States was facing that would jeopardize our economic future if we don't do something about it.
So when you got somebody like Fed Chairman Powell, who is for all fair measures, independent, he is not political. He doesn't come in and talk about culture from a political perspective, because a lot of people will hear this show and say, oh, this is just right-wing agitprop. But the fact is that there is a cultural problem here. And now he is saying, what you just referred to, is that he is saying that this will impact the economy, that this has a direct impact on people's income. Is that correct?
That is correct. And that boys being unmotivated and going back back into their home at the age, there's 35% of boys in the late 20s and early 30s now who are living at home. That's 66% larger percentage than the sisters of these boys. It used to be that girls would be more likely to go back and live at home than boys, and the boys are traumatized in a number of ways about this. So first of all, the fathers and mothers, especially the fathers, are usually ashamed that they couldn't, something that they did that didn't lead to the boys having being able to sustain themselves. And what I found was that there are very significant differences, about 10 significant differences in the way that dads parent versus the way that moms parent, and that both styles of parenting are needed, and what I call checks and balance parenting, that the mother's tendency to protect and sometimes overprotect and nurture, and the child left with the security of knowing that mom has unconditional love for that child, very important. But it's also important that dads also have unconditional love, but they express it through more conditional approval. And so a dad is much more, so dads and moms, for example, they're very likely to set boundaries the same way. Sweetie, you can't have your ice cream until you finish your peas. And moms will, and then the child will test the boundaries. Oh, let's see how few peas I can have before I get my ice cream.
Yeah.
But the mom and dads enforce the boundaries differently as a rule. Sometimes these roles are reversed. Moms will be more likely to say, when the child says, oh, I had some peas, Mom, can I have my ice cream now? Moms will, the best of moms will say, I'll tell you what, have these 20 more peas, then you can have your ice cream. Then the child has 10 more peas and says, okay, I have more peas, can I have my ice cream? Mom sees the difference, but she says, am I really going to make a big thing out of a few peas? And the child's been stressed, I'm stressed, these are a few precious minutes together, I don't want it to be a big conflict. Dads will be more likely to say, excuse me, we have a deal here. The deal is you can have your ice cream when you finish your peas. So finish, oh, you're so mean. Mom doesn't do that. I'm sorry, you can continue whining and complaining, and there'll be no more ice cream tomorrow night either.
Right.
And then the child, looks at the situation and goes, all right, with Dad, I have no option but to finish my peas if I want the ice cream. So what the children learn with dads, the children raised predominantly by dads, are only 15% of them are likely to have ADHD. Raised predominantly by moms, 30% are likely to have ADHD. And you can see in that example, one of the reasons the child focused on the peas needs to focus his attention on doing what he needs to do to get what he wants to have. He is learning to have attention focus rather than attention deficit. With the mom, the child is learning how to manipulate a better deal. This worked last time, maybe this will work the next time. And so he becomes very good at honing and being manipulative.
Gotcha.
So
I want to continue this discussion. We've got Dr. Warren Farrell, the author of The Boy Crisis. And is there a boy crisis in our culture today? We're going to get a lot deeper into this, including we're talking about gender a lot lately. I want to get into this as well. That's coming from certain corners of our culture. We'll be right back. Dave Sussman here at America's Voice News. Stay tuned. And Dave Sussman back with you at America's Voice News, and we're delighted to have with us Dr. Warren Farrell, the author of The Boy Crisis. And we were just chatting a little bit here about some of the effects. You refer to ADHD with kids that have less involvement with their fathers. Fathers play a tremendous role. Now, just for our audience and for yourself as well, I'm the divorced father of two. I have a very unique situation. My ex and I get along very, very well. We are good co-parents, and that has always been our priority. But I do understand that for many people of our situation, divorced parents, they don't have the ability to do that. They're not fortunate enough to have that kind of relationship. So that's where the courts get involved. And let me ask you, you talk about this in the book a little bit. How have family courts and the displacement of fathers from children's lives through family courts impacted the result here of the boy crisis that you refer to?
The family courts have been way behind what the research shows. And part of this is the politics of lawyers. The American Bar Association has been very resistant to equal parenting. When there's equal parenting as a presumption, there's no big fight in court, and therefore the lawyers are not hired, and so on. But the more important thing than the politics of this is that I now know, when I research the boy crisis, exactly what needs to be done for children to have an optimal experience, almost as good as in the intact family, if there are what I call four must-dos. The first must-do is that there needs to be about an equal amount of time between the mother and the father. The second is that the mother and father need to live within about 20 minutes drive time from each other, so the children don't resent the parent who they're driving to because they have to lose contact with a birthday party or a soccer game or something, and so that then they're not able to participate in activities in school. Third is that the children are not able to overhear or detect any bad mouthing or negative body language about the other parent that is absent. And fourth is that there's consistent communication counseling. So when parents aren't as fortunate as you and your wife are, and that they can become, they have the obligation to do the hard work of knowing how to communicate effectively about their children, so that the children don't pick up that the mother's on one page, the father's on the other, or if the mother is on one page and the father's on the other, that the mother's rules apply at mom's house and dad's rules apply at dad's house, and both rules are fine, and the children are going to benefit from both in different types of ways. That's the message that has to come across to the kids, and that message usually comes across best when it's consistent relationship counseling or couples communication counseling. I do couples workshops all over the country, and I find that when parents, that usually there's a complete lack of understanding of what dad style versus mom style parenting is, and what how the differences are both helpful to the children. So, for example, dads will be far more likely than moms to roughhouse, and they'll take the three kids and throw them on the couch and say, okay, right, the job here is for the three of you to jump off on my back and pin me down before I pin you down, and all three of you together. And mom's looking over and going, oh my God, I feel like I have just one more child to monitor. But on the other hand, I don't want to be controlling, but she's thinking in the back of her head, I know where this is going to end up. This is going to end up with somebody crying, or somebody being hurt, and she's only, though, about 100% likely to be right.
Always.
So, always, particularly in this instance. And so the children are doing all this, and sooner or later somebody does end up crying. And dad notices that let's say the older brother stuck his elbow in his sister's eye, and so the dad says, sweetie, you can't do that. That's not okay. And if you do that, we're going to stop roughhousing. Okay, Dad, I'll be fine. But then the dad returns to the roughhousing to check out to see whether the child can enforce that rule. Yeah. But 90% of the time, the child does not pay attention to that, because they, under the condition of what psychologists call emotional intelligence under fire, the child cares more about winning the wrestling thing and being the kingpin of the kingpinners than he does about his sister's needs. And so now here's where the crucial behavior stops. At that point, starts. That's where dad tends to say, okay, we're stopping the roughhousing. No more roughhousing till tomorrow night. The benefit of this comes from tomorrow night, when dad again says, you got to think of your younger brother's, your younger sister's needs. And this time the children know they're going to lose the roughhousing if they don't think about their brothers and sisters' needs. So the data shows that children who do roughhousing with dads, who enforce boundaries and do this, they build a bond with dads, but then they pay attention to what dads say, because they're going to lose what they want. And therefore they learn postponed gratification, and they learn empathy. They learn empathy for their brothers and sisters, not because they want to learn empathy, but because they lose what they want if they aren't empathetic. And they learn they don't learn from being lectured to about being thoughtful, as to what is the difference between being assertive and versus aggressive. They learn by practicing it and trying it, and dad saying, no, I'm sorry, that was too aggressive. And then they lose something by the roughhousing, by being too aggressive, that they don't pay attention once they're warned. And that's the way they learn those distinctions. And so the children who do roughhousing feel much more comfortable with distinctions between what's assertive versus aggressive, how to be empathetic. And as a result, those children have more friends. And when they have more friends, they're less likely to be depressed. They're less likely to withdraw into video games and withdraw into video porn. And
just not to interject, but what you're telling me is that empathy is really the key here. And they learn empathy through the parental relationships.
They learn empathy through boundary enforcement. being required to think of their sisters and brothers' needs or the next door neighbor's needs.
Gotcha.
And if they don't think of that, they lose what they want.
Gotcha. Now, in the cases of families, and we do see a major breakdown in families across the country. In fact, I recently read a statistic here in the last couple of minutes before our last break that, the black family, the African-American family, we're improving dramatically from the Emancipation Proclamation all the way through the 50s to the early 60s. And we didn't see crime at levels that we do now today. And then what happened is that we passed the Great Society in the 1960s and basically turned everything over to the state or the city or the federal government as far as determining, who gets what handouts and what schools you must go to and this and that. We've seen nothing but a breakdown, and we've seen huge crime levels. We see it in Chicago. We see it in other major cities around the country as well. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's exactly right. We had the first hint of this back in 1965 when there was the Moynihan Report. Dan Moynihan was somebody who served under Republican and Democratic administrations, had a PhD, and so he put out this big report about the inner cities, and many people thought, oh, this is going to show that black communities are inferior to whites. But it didn't show that. What it showed is that among the African Americans and families in inner cities, the ones that didn't have dads involved, which was at the 25% level in 1965, they were the families that were having the problems, committing the crimes, and doing the things that gave the black community a bad reputation. At that point in time, 1965, the percentage of Caucasians that had that grew up in fatherless families was only 3.4%. Now, today, the percentage of Caucasians that are in minimal father conditions, or what I call dad deprived, is at the 34-35% level among Caucasians. Wow. Higher than it was among yes, tenfold, and higher than it was in the African American community when Moynihan pinpointed the fatherless as being the problem. Among African Americans today, it's in the 72-73% category of children growing up in dad deprivation. And so, and now the contribution of the Great Society and Johnson's thing, the biggest flaw in the Great Society was very compassionate, helped many women out, but it also gave that money to women who did not have fathers involved. And so in many respects, it reinforced the problem by, if the black African-American man was not earning much money, or the Caucasian man wasn't earning enough money, so the mother and father both agreed, listen, I can't live with you, otherwise you can't get the money you need, and I'm not earning enough. The government became a substitute dad. Yeah. And I found that all around the world, but especially in the United States, there is when you have the absence of father, you have the presence of government. And so I started looking at the costs of the ICE, Homeland Security, because I mentioned before in the last segment that almost all the ISIS recruits were dad deprived. Looked at crime, and you start adding all those up. I got to about an estimate of that the cost to America per year is about $1 trillion from dad deprivation. It's probably way under what is accurate, but you can't do all these figures perfectly.
I want to get more into this and also our next generation here. And again, as I mentioned earlier, I was promising for this segment, we were going to talk about gender and gender roles and what's happening, but we're going to get into that right after the break. Dave Sussman here at America's Voice News, and we have Warren Farrell, PhD, author of The Boy Crisis, with us. We'll be right back. And Dave Sussman back with you at Whiskey Politics on America's Voice News. And if you're not following us, you can find me at David Sussman on Twitter, find us on Facebook and Instagram. And also, if you are listening to us on podcast, you can find us on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play. Just look for Whiskey Politics and the Ricochet Audio Network. And Dr. Farrell, where can folks find you, by the way?
Let's see, they can find me online at warrenfarrell.com. I couldn't remember anything more complicated, so they gave me an easy one. And the Farrell is F as in Frank, Arrell, since Will Ferrell became much more famous than I. And it's and if you're looking for the Boy Crisis book, I have to say that the Amazon has both the hardcover and the paperback on a really good sale now, so it's a much better place to buy it than from me directly.
So I've had several people on our show, and in fact, a couple of people, one of which you were in the movie with, Red Pilled, Karen Strawn, and she was talking about MGTOW, men going their own way, and this was a kind of a group of individual men that feel like they just are not able to have relationships or proper relationships with women, and they're kind of just dropping the whole idea of being in a relationship altogether. I don't want to get too deep into that, but it's a fascinating subject, and maybe we can have you on to discuss that. But one of the things that I'm starting to see right now, and it's growing, and is this whole idea of gender as a social construct, that men and women really are based upon what society expects of them and not their biology. And we're seeing this now with discussions about trans, or people that refuse to refer to themselves as one sex or the other. I just flew on a couple of days ago. I went to Vegas for an interview just day in and day out, and I noticed that United Airlines didn't require me to put in whether I'm a male or female. They say that I can actually now not consider myself any sex. How is this discussion? Boys should be wearing pink. Girls should be wearing blue. There is no gender. How is this discussion impacting our culture today? And what do you think we're going to be looking at here in the future with this?
Yeah, it's impacting us in a lot of ways. First of all, there's a denial that men and women are different and have differences. And when people ask me, what is it, nature or nurture? I say, yes. And they go, what? And I said, no, it's about 80% nature and about 80% nurture. and they say, is your math just bad? And right. It's like, because if you look at the biological differences between men and women, they are extremely substantial, both among humans and almost all animals. On the other hand, there's a huge ability to have a social influence on that, because people have two other parts of their biology. One is the ability to adapt, is built into our biology. And the other is the RCZ, the rostral cingulate zone. It's a part of our brain that responds very, very strongly with dopamine, the feel-good drug, when we are complimented, when we are told we are heroes, when we're told we're worthwhile, when we're seen as being a wonderful angel or a wonderful person in whatever way. And so we are able to be manipulated by other people's approval to do significant things that are different. So the Vikings, for example, they were considered one of the most ferocious and cruel cultures of all human history. But oftentimes, after they conquered England, the next generation settled down and were often quite nurturing, married to the women of the families that they had conquered, and so on, integrated with England. And so you see this enormous capacity for adaptation that's built into human biology, which is why there's a false dichotomy between, is it nature or is it nurture? Now, with that, the best part of what feminists and the people who say, don't declare being a male, don't declare being a female. The best part is that they're trying to allow for freedom for our children to look inside of themselves and discover who they need or want to be. This is a freedom that we never had in history before, because historically speaking, every generation had its war, and mothers and fathers had to tell their sons, you need to serve in this war if you're going to be a man. And so we had to train our sons for what I call heroic intelligence. And heroic intelligence was training our sons to be willing to be disposable in order to be called a hero. And so being disposable and fighting in the war was extremely crucial for us not being under Nazi rule today. But at the same time, it wasn't necessarily healthy for the boy. Heroic intelligence was the opposite of health intelligence. And every parent was sort of caught historically between wanting their sons to be that Marine, to be that hero, to be that, the elite of the armed services, the Navy SEALs or whatever. And on the other hand, wanting their son to live. And so today, with fewer fewer people required for war and fewer men being the sole breadwinner, we have more options to train our sons to live. But we also have taken away the purpose. So we have, and so boys without dads have two major problems. One is a purpose void followed by a dad void. So the boy doesn't know, I can't become a hero by killing or by being a sole breadwinner. So what do I do? And without a dad as a role model, he often doesn't know, have an influence and a role model as to what to do and the guidance as to what to do. That's why dads are more crucial today than they have ever been throughout history.
Does this impact us biologically in some way? I refer to in the first 10 minutes before you came on here, there's a poll that recently came out, and it showed that the millennial generation is having sex far, far less, significantly less than older generations. Now, I don't know about you. I don't want to age myself, but when I grew up, this is all I thought about. And you know, I mean, you get out of bed in the morning so you can meet girls, right? Yes, this generation, yes, exactly. And my kids, you know, I've got two millennial kids, or I guess Gen Z, I guess it is, right? I got a son about to go to college, another son in middle school. They don't seem to be having that same level of interest that me and my friends did back in the 80s.
Yeah, it is influenced by, you know, what we think about. It's also influenced by fear. You talked about MGTOW, men going their own way. Those are the men that have politically and consciously said, this is an impossible world for me. Everything, if I reach out and I pursue a woman, I'm a potential sexual harasser. If I don't pursue a woman, I'm a potential wimp. And I don't know what to do. And so for each of those boys that are caught in this overtly political withdrawal from the world and from women, there's thousands of other boys that are the MGTOW, men going their own way equivalent, who are the boys withdrawing into video games, withdrawing into porn. Porn is access to a variety of attractive women without fearing rejection, and at a price they can afford. And so boys withdraw into that because many boys are feeling that, you know, I don't know what to do. I'm afraid to go too fast. I'm afraid to go too slow. And underneath it all, they're feeling some anger at the fact that, wait a minute, why is it our responsibility to take the initiatives all the time? If you know, women want sex less, why don't they speak up and share responsibility for asking for it when they do want it? So rather than making us be the ones that want it, and then we get all these negative messages about sex, that sex is dirty, and then we're expected to initiate.
I think there's a total double standard in our culture in this, because women want sex just as much as men do. I mean, that's my belief. And so, you know, unless you're carrying some psychological baggage, which is preventing you from wanting to experience that part of your life. But for most people, it's a biological need. So are we missing something today? You keep going back to fathers, right? Are fathers not teaching chivalry and being bold simultaneously? Because there is a fine line. You don't want to be a jerk, and at the same time, you still have to be somewhat assertive, right?
Yes, exactly. Women, you know, women are saying that they want the sensitivity, but yet they're usually going out with the football players. They're usually going out with the very, you know, the high performers, and the high performers tend to have a fair amount of testosterone and be very assertive and confident in their sexuality, and more overtly sexual. And so there's and the women are interested much more in them still than they are. They read romance novels. The romance novels, you know, are not titled "He stopped when I stopped." He stopped when I said no. That's
a bestseller right there.
A bestseller. You can imagine that being a bestseller. And you know, and Gone with the Wind. You know, is the woman says no, 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 and
the Rhett Butler character. Shades of Grey. I mean, that's huge
50 Shades
success,
of Grey, right? A huge success, but it's a success men sense, but don't, you know, they don't study this like I do, so they don't say, wait a minute, 50 Shades of Grey is about almost a sadistic, sadomasochistic type of relationship, and this is the #1 fiction bestseller book of all time for women. Right. If this is women's fantasy, and Gone with the Wind is the best-selling movie of all time for women, then what is that tell me about women's fantasy? On the other hand, the message I'm getting is be sensitive, and Rhett Butler should never have dragged that woman upstairs. That's clearly, some type of rape, and so, at the very least, sexual harassment, and certainly 50 Shades of Grey would be a nightmare.
That's the other movie.
Yeah, 50 Shades of Grey, exactly. And so, and this was both a movie and a book, and in book form, it was the #1 bestseller non-paperback book of this time.
So again, coming back to this, from a biological standard, so there seems to be a cultural push towards essentially denying our biology. And when you have children that are raised today, and boys and girls are supposed to choose their own gender, they can't choose what to eat or wear clothes. Okay, children are children, and this whole idea, and we're starting to see this now coming from, and I hate to make this political, but it really is the cultural left in the world. It isn't just in the United States. We're seeing it in Western Europe and Australia and other parts of the world as well. This cultural left push to try to basically give responsibility for choosing your own gender to babies. Like there's people that are out there, and I think personally they are insane. Okay, that are now suing their parents for gendering them when they were a baby.
Yes, absolutely amazing. And so let's break this down a little bit. If you're a parent and you want to give your children both dolls and trucks and see where they go with it, no big issue. You get a sense of what direction what type of personality your child has. You don't shame them for whatever they do. But if they start saying to you some version of, I want to change, I'm not sure whether I'm a boy or a girl, that's something that giving them structure, giving them strength, giving them confidence, giving them both parents different parenting styles, then the boy and making sure that your child knows, no, that is not a decision you are able to make until you're an adult. We're parents and your children for a reason. And our job is to give you confidence to be who you are. We will help you discover who you are, but we won't allow you to do things that are that may have long-term implications for you without you first being old enough to make that decision for yourself.
And that's what's needed. Parents basically saying, we're the adults. We've got a little bit more experience than you, probably 30, 40, 50 years of experience in life than you do. You do it our way, and when you're 18, you could figure it out for yourself. Now, I don't know what the percentages are on this, Dr. Farrell, but how many children do you think are born that are, and to those kids that are, my heart goes out to them, but are having some kind of identity gender crisis at a very, very young age? If you were to put it in a percentage number, what are you looking at?
Kids want approval, and if the people around them are saying, "Here's what you should be," it's now the new vogue to do this versus that. The issue is not their biology; it's the part of their biology that is seeking approval and is not getting enough approval from other places, so that it has to go to trying to be like the people who are the role models.
So that's a really important point. So you're talking about the conditioning, the behavioral conditioning of these children is to think, oh, well, mom and dad want me to think this way. I'm going to think this way. And that in some way will lead them to making decisions that their biology otherwise would not have done so for them.
And especially not just mom and dad, but because mom and dads aren't usually as overt about it. But if they're involved with in a community where there's especially a lot of liberal type of thinking, then there'll be a lot of peer groups who are very sort of oriented toward, oh, this is the new vogue, and who's getting the most attention in town? It's that boy who became a girl, or the girl who became a boy, and they want to be talked about. They want to be the center of attention. Also,
that's really scary. I wish we could spend more time with you on this, and maybe we can have you back to discuss this and go further into this. And I greatly appreciate you taking the time. This is fascinating, and it is a discussion that needs to take place in our society here. The Boy Crisis, Dr. Warren Farrell, and definitely check this out on Amazon.com. It really is a fascinating read, and great having you back on again. Thank you so much for taking the time, and we really do appreciate it. So we'll be back again real soon. Dave Sussman here, America's Voice News, Whiskey Politics. A special thanks again to Dr. Warren Farrell, and we'll be back again with more fascinating guests. Cheers.